Okay, great. All right, back to business. So there was a question about what the backup and saving for settings of VS Code looks like. And so there's two different kinds of settings in VS Code by default. There's workspace settings and there's user settings. So if I go into settings here, preferences and settings, you can see that I can either select user settings, which applies to my entire VS Code. So anytime that you have it open, these settings will be applied. And then there's more specific settings specifically for this workspace. So when you have this particular project or folder open, you may set some settings that override your user settings. So if it's something that you want to change that should just be the default all the time, like what format are you going to use for your React projects, probably put that in user settings rather than workspace. But if you're working on a specific project that has one thing that you need to change for whatever reason, maybe you're working with a team, they have different standards, then you can set that in workspace. And user settings are stored somewhere in your file system where you won't see them. But workspace settings, if I were to set something here, let's set the font size to 18. I don't know if I have to save this or not. Yeah, so when I did this, it took a second, but it created this .vs code folder up here, which has the setting that I just changed, and it set the font size to a different size. So anytime you change a workspace setting, it's tracked as a dot file. We call them dot files because if you look in your terminal and you ls or dir, depending on what directory or what operating system you have, to check what files are in the directory, anything that starts with a dot doesn't show up. There's secretly a .git folder in this project as well because I have it connected to a Git repository, but that wouldn't show up either. But this VS Code folder, we could put this into our Git repository and commit that with our Git repository, and that would save our settings. So that's one way of doing it. If you have something that's workspace and project specific, you probably want to put it inside of your Git repository and commit those settings so that everyone else can use them too. If you're setting user settings or something that you want to just be for you, but you want to transfer them between different devices. So I have VS Code on my desktop, and I also have VS Code on my laptop that I bring around. And I generally want to have the same settings. Having to set everything twice is a pain in the butt. And also, if I were to lose all of these settings for whatever reason, if I had to get a new computer, then I would have to reset all of them. So in that case, if you want to save your user settings, you can go into your account section and you can log in. I've logged in with my GitHub account. I think that's the easiest way to do it because you all have a GitHub account. You might be able to do it with a Microsoft account as well. I don't know officially. But there's a setting here called Settings Sync, and it will sync any setting changes you make to your user settings between every VS Code where you're logged in as the same user. So this is how you would back them up so that if you had to get a new computer and you logged in again with your same GitHub account to VS Code, you could get those settings back. It also tracks which extensions you have installed, I think. I haven't been able to get that to work, but theoretically that's a thing. And that's also really helpful to make sure you have all the same extensions. I have a lot of extensions installed, just so many. I don't actually think all of these are mine. But anyway, there's a lot of extensions. I think most of these are disabled, but you can copy all of those between computers as well. Definitely worth doing, if for no other reason, backing it up. But eventually you'll be working from multiple computers, and that's really helpful. Okay. Other questions? Jordan says Fridays are really hard. Any other days? My vote, that would also be my vote. I think people generally like to go out and do things on Fridays and on the weekends. So I don't want to take up anyone's Friday. What are the, actually, let me go back. Jordan had another question. I'm having an error that I'm stuck on. Uncaught type error, cannot read properties of undefined reading map. Okay. I don't have the exact context, but I do have a pretty good idea of what would probably be causing this. And to do this, I'm going to show you in a web browser. What I like to do personally, when I'm just experimenting with JavaScript to see like what would happen if I do this, I like to open my dev console just on any page, doesn't matter which one, because you can just write JavaScript line by line and execute it right away, and you don't have to set up anything crazy. And so in this case, I want to sort of show this JavaScript concept. And so I'm going to do this from the dev console. So the error that she was seeing is this. Oop. I had no idea that was a thing. Anyway, but this is the error that she was seeing, more or less. And this happens if you have a variable, but don't assign a value to it. So right now, this variable is undefined. There's no value in there. It has not been defined yet. By console.log this, it's undefined. And probably what was happening is you had a variable that is supposed to be an array. So pretend, let's assign an array to this variable, and it's an empty array. Let's put something in there just so that there's some content. So now if I console.log this, it's going to show that there's 2 items in here. So if I call the dot map function on this array, yeah, we can make this a little bigger. So if I call dot map, map is a function of an array where I can specify a function that we apply to every single object in the array. So I could map and say for each object, which we're going to say is thing, you can name that whatever you want. Let's return thing plus something. So we're going to concatenate another string. And what this produces is an array where all the items are, you have the original content, which is hello, and then we append the string something to the end of it. So we have hello something, world something. So this is normally how you would do a dot map. But if for some reason your variable was undefined, let's create a new variable for this. And you don't put a value in it, and I try and call a function, it's going to give us that same error. Uncaught type error, something else is undefined, which isn't exactly what you were seeing. Yours said uncaught type error cannot read properties of undefined reading map, but that's exactly what this is. You have an undefined variable for some reason, probably a bug in your code somewhere, or you didn't initialize something, or maybe it existed and then you moved it somewhere else and that variable no longer exists. And you are reading the properties, reading map from that undefined value. But undefined doesn't have a property map. Undefined doesn't have any properties.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so I get with like JavaScript, the whole undefined thing, that makes complete sense to me, but I guess I'm confused by the React part of this, because in this one page that I'm getting the error on, and the to-do list is the array, and there is data in it because that was the array we made in the I guess assignment number 2.
Yeah.
And then now we're adding like this props thing to it. And so it was working before with lesson 2. And now that I've tried to drop props in here, that's where I'm getting this error now. So I guess I'm not understanding how to define it such that the props get values out of the array. because the array is there, there's data in it, it's not empty. But for
Okay.
some reason, the way that I'm referencing it or the way that it's being used, the props are not getting any information from that array.
Okay. This is for this week's assignment.
Lesson 3. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have code that we could review as a group? Are you like in a position where you could share your screen and look at the code or not?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, I
Okay.
can share screen.
Then I'm going to stop sharing and you can share and we can look at it as a group. There's a couple of extensions questions really quick. Extensions do not make your computer slow unless you have way too many. I would not worry about that in particular. And to Maher, there's some extension suggestions in the week 1 agenda, which you should be able to scroll up to in the Slack announcements, just based on what I think is most helpful for React applications. So I definitely take a look at that. Okay, all you, go ahead, Jordan.
Okay. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see it.
Is it big enough?
It's big enough for me, but maybe you zoom in like once or twice for everyone else who has a smaller screen.
Okay, so this is the to-do list.jsx, and so this is the array that we made from week 2. And then this is some of the residual code with some of the new code, and the error is on this here where it's to-do list.map.
Yeah. So the code that's in here looks fine to me. So props is an object that bundles up a bunch of different things into one object, and they're all properties of that object. And you pass into your React component all of those properties separately when you actually like specify in a different component that you want to create a new instance of this to-do list. And so presumably when you're calling props.to-do list, it's looking for a property of the object called to-do list, but that property is not being populated. So when you're calling to-do list, sorry, it's the same word, so it's hard to specify. When you're creating a to-do list in a different component in your app.jsx, presumably, you are not passing the to-do list property. So let's go into your app.jsx and see if we're passing in properties as expected. Yeah, so your to-do list here, you're just declaring this component. So you're saying throw a to-do list in here, but you're not giving it any properties right now. Right now, you're just creating one. And so that props object that you declare in your to-do list is going to be completely empty. Your to-do list you've specified as a static value outside of your component, which is fine. You could use that if you want to, but it doesn't exist inside your properties object because you haven't passed it as a property. So what you would need to do here in order to get this to work is in your app.jsx on line 16, after to-do list, put a space and then the name of a specific property that you want to pass to that component, which in this case is to-do list. And then you would write an equal sign and an open and closing curly brace. And then inside of there, you give it some value that is going to be attached to the to-do
Oh,
list property. So
so
props is
is
an
this
object. It'll now have a property to-do list, and you
so
have to
is
give it some value.
this where I need to take it from?
Yes,
Did I have
exactly
it on
right.
the wrong one?
Yes, so that needs to go in your app.jsx. Yeah. And so your to-do list doesn't exist here, so you're going to have to copy that out of your to-do list.jsx, your constant array up at the top.
Cut it or copy it?
Cut it. It needs to move to the other file. And you can paste it out there. So now to-do list exists, and you're passing it as a property, which will attach it to that props object, and then you can pull that out inside of your to-do list component. Does that kind of make sense?
I think so. Let me save it here and see what if
I'm a little curious why it's still giving you a red squiggly
Um,
in to-do list.jsx. You probably want to
it
name that.
it doesn't like it's claiming that it's declared but never read. So it's like an ESLint error.
Okay, I think so there's a couple more things we probably need to do here. So your to-do list is an array, right? And you're mapping over that array, which pulls out each individual object from that to-do list array. And so that thing that is currently underlined is a variable that holds in each iteration of the map function the specific object inside of that array that you're operating. So we probably shouldn't call it to-do list. We should call it like to-do item, because when we call .map, that variable is going to be a singular element from the array in this iteration. Does that make sense?
Well, I think I've named it these things because of what it asks us to name them from the assignment.
Let's export the key attribute. Okay. I think what I'm looking at is the refactor to-do list.jsx, where you import to-do list item and you call .map, which you've already done.
Hmm.
And the only thing it's specifying to you to do is to pass it a key property and a to-do property, which you don't currently have in there. And in order to do that, we need to like actually map over the to-do
Oh, and
list.
sorry, this was the typo. I had this set to that like that.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So that's a singular to-do item in each iteration. And so a couple more things. In your key property now that you're passing to-do list item, to-do is not a property in props. You didn't pass it to your to-do list. So you probably need to get rid of props.todo in favor of just to-do.id, because it doesn't exist as part of your props object. And the other thing you need to pass to it is the prop to-do, which I think is what's consumed by your to-do list item. If you go into to-do list item.jsx, yeah, so here you have props.todo.title. So it needs some property inside of that props object that you're passing called to-do, which is the object that has all of your to-do information. So we need to pass it the to-do property. So we go back into to-do list.jsx.
Up there.
No, that was good
Okay.
as it was. So
Okay.
that's your props object, but we have to actually pass it the property. So on line 6, after the key property, we want to pass it another property. And we're going to call this property to do as well. And the value we're going to pass it to is the to do variable that was declared on line 5. If that's confusing, you could call it something different on line 5. Yeah. So what this is doing is it's passing a property to your to-do list item. It's giving it the value, the specific to-do that's being mapped over. And then in your to-do list item, you're taking that property and you're grabbing the title from it and displaying. This theoretically would work if you save and run it. I don't know if you haven't finished the add to do form yet, then maybe it won't work.
No, I haven't. I've only done that first one.
Oh,
Isn't
but
it
it should be showing
supposed
you the hard coded
it
stuff.
should be showing the list, right?
In theory, yeah. But there's no console errors, which is very interesting to me. Props.to-do list.map. Um, Key to
I
do.
think this part is confusing me too. The to do equals to do.
Yeah. So your property can be named anything you want. The thing that you're passing into a component can be named whatever you want. It doesn't matter if you already have a variable named the same thing or a class named the same thing or whatever. You can pass a property with any name. And the property that it's telling you to pass is to do. That's what the instructions are saying. You chose in your map function on line 5 to name the variable that holds whatever the current to-do object that you're mapping. You named it to do. You could name that anything you want. If you want to differentiate it, you could call it to do item or to do data or anything else that still sort of fits what it is actually representing.
Well, in the book, they used item.
Yeah, then you could use item. That makes a lot of sense because
And
it's one
then
individual to do item at any given part of this map function.
that would be item there.
Yes. So the property is still to do. You're going to have to change this red squiggle to also be item. And that is equally as valid.
And then this should be item now as well.
No, because you're still passing the property to do. Like that's the name of the property. And so that's what you pull out of the props object. You change the value that you're passing to it, but the name of the property is still to do. And so that's what you would have to pull
From
out.
there.
Yes. This looks to me like it should be correct. Let's do a couple things to try and figure out where the error is coming from. Can you do a new line after or like in front of the that's not gonna work. What's interesting to me here is that your function here doesn't actually return. It should still work. Your function is weird here because normally what you would do is you would do your arrow function and then open and closing curly braces and then have return and then the like the JSX inside of that return statement. You don't actually have a return in here, which
I thought arrow statements got you away from returns.
if you have a one line function, then you don't need a return. And so that's why I'm saying this should still work in theory. Can you go back into app.jsx? Return each one. Yeah, this is totally normal. I think that either your to-do list.jsx isn't rendering or your to-do list item isn't rendering. I would bet my money that to-do list for some reason is not actually running. I don't know why this doesn't work. It looks like it should work to me. Maybe we could experiment with doing this the normal function route and see if that changes anything. And if it doesn't, then we undo it. So let's do like an opening curly brace after your arrow. And then do a new line and then return in front of that parenthesis. Just the word return. And then we need a closing curly brace down there. And let's save this and see if this does anything differently. Refresh the page. Still nothing. Huh. I honestly do not know. This might be worth taking to a one-on-one mentor this week. This code looks correct to me. Can we, sorry, I'm just curious at this point. I don't want to take up the whole session, but I do want to look at this a little more. Can you do another new line in front of the return statement and just do like a console.log with some random value? Doesn't matter what. And then Control S and refresh. Okay, so this component is being rendered because it's calling the function. And then we return an unordered list, props.todolist.map. Can you, instead of logging test, can we log the props object and see what that looks like? Not in quotes, you'll have to get rid of the quotes. And then hit save. Cool. So that's an array. Props.to-do list is an array of 4 items, ID and title. What? Can you go into your Elements tab in your DevTools? And let's expand that root element and see if we can find your unordered list. Div ID equals root, expand that form. Okay, so we have an unordered list, but it's not.
Is map right now returning anything? The actual map function, or is just a because
That's exactly what
I
it
think
is.
the map is not returning anything.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Maybe because of there is a curly braces.
Yeah.
The Mac syntax wants a word return before they add to do.
Yeah. So you'll need to return your to-do list item since it's calling a function and the result of that function needs to be a JSX element for it to be rendered. So you could either put a return in front of to-do list item, or you could get rid of those pink curly braces at the end of line 7 and the beginning of line 9, since it's just a one-liner, and it'll naturally try and return that element for you. Sorry, wrong one. On line 9, put that curly brace back and get rid of the yellow one in front. Cool. And that should theoretically work. Because it's a one-line thing, it'll return it automatically like you were thinking earlier. Or if we had multiple like really complicated things, we were doing other stuff inside of that function, you could do it with a return statement, exactly. But that was a great catch, Vlad. Does that make sense?
So it's returning now because we got rid of the extra braces that made it a multi-line thing.
Yes. And what was happening with the curly braces, it says, go through this multi-line function, do all the things, and it created that element, but it didn't return it. And so this like JavaScript expression that's the inside of your blue curly braces needs to actually return an element that can be inside of that unordered list. And it wasn't returning anything. This does happen fairly often. Like this is not something that never happens. I've done this before on multiple occasions.
Well, this is much better than I was at. I was totally lost with the prop stuff. So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is like the most important week and also one of the hardest weeks of content. Props and state are like the 2 most important things to understand for React, but it's very weird to sort of wrap your head around the first time. So you're not the only one.
Well, hopefully my error can help other people.
I hope so. All right. Any other questions or things that didn't work that you're curious about? The instructor did not install Vite during the video, despite the book telling you to do so. Yeah, the videos on the dashboard are kind of old. We figured this out after we ended the first session where someone had a question about it. The videos were recorded, I think, in 2021 or 2020 or something like that. So they're a few years old, and this year is when they've decided to go through and revise the React curriculum. where previously they used a different tool for bootstrapping your application and for running it instead of Vite. Vite is a much more recent tool within the past probably 5 years or so. I think the benefits to using Vite over Create React App is Create React App is extremely antiquated. That's been around since almost the beginning of React, which was many, many years ago. And it's very slow. I think there's a lot of technical craziness that happens inside of Vite that I could not even begin to explain to you. But it's like almost instant. And Create React App, especially if you have a big project, it can take multiple seconds just to start it up, which is really, really annoying. And hot reloads are very slow as well. So there's not really any reason to use Create React App over Vite. I think Vite is pretty much the accepted standard for new projects at this point. So definitely stick to that unless you can find a better option. Another question. Parents can pass arguments to a child component, and child components can pass arguments into a parent. Can a child pass to another child? Or does it have to pass up to the parent and the parent pass down? Yes, so that last part is correct. So there's two concepts. There's state, which is data that is internal to your specific component. Your state is maintained by a specific instance of a component. So if I have a to-do list and I have 3 to-do list items, each to-do list item has its own unique state. And you can pass data to a child component inside of that return. Let me just pull up a screen share really quick. So just to pick up this arbitrary thing, if I have a component, what is happening? Why is my computer so slow? All right. I'm mixing up my function types. All right, so if I have this component and I give it a props object here and say I want to display whatever props.title is, which is what you're doing for your to-do list item, I can pass this value props.title by doing components title. So, and this works. I will have to import this. Come on. This is so annoying. You can do it. It's not that hard. Anyway, whatever. We're just going to pretend like it works. But I can pass it a prop with any name, and I can pass data down to a child, but there's no easy way for a child to just arbitrarily pass data back up to a parent. Inside of this component, I don't have any reference to my parent. There's no clear way of doing it. And so we do this in like a couple different ways. But what it all boils down to in the end is that I will have some sort of function. Let's declare a piece of state, which if you haven't gotten to it yet, looks like this. And what I can do is I can pass whatever the current value of this state object is. So our state object is title. And every time this function re-renders for whatever reason, which happens a lot, or if our data changes, we can always guarantee that the state is going to be maintained between renders. And so we pass whatever the current value of title is as a property down to our child. But if our child wants to set the title, maybe over here, let's declare a button on click. We want to set title to string. Close that. This is so gross. We have no way to pass the new string that we want to set it to up to the parent by default. And so what we do is we pass a function, which is the second argument to our state variable. We pass a reference to the function, which I'm going to pass as a property called setTitle. We're going to pass a reference to this function. And we can call that function from the child component, which executes it in the parent component. So maybe on click, we do props.setTitle hello world. So when this gets clicked, we will set the title of our parent element to be hello world. And so this is a function that exists up here, and it'll update the state variable. And so that's how we get data, or we change data inside of the parent. So generally, what this means is any data that needs to be sent to multiple different children needs to be state that's maintained in the parent. If you have 3 different children that all share some piece of data or all need to use it, then it needs to exist in the parent so that you can send it to all the children. And if you want one of the children to be able to update it, then you would send a function that the child can call and maybe pass a new value to. And that function executes in the parent and updates the information in the parent. The child never knows anything about the parent, only what it's given, which would be a function. This is an extremely common pattern. I think you'll talk about it next week a lot more in the book. It's called lifting state. But this is like a fundamental part of how you can actually make a React website, and is very, very important. All right, another question. Is props outdated and now we use context or something else? Props are not outdated. Props will never go away. It's the only way that we can pass data from a parent to a child. Use state and use context are things called hooks. I don't know that we ever explicitly talk about use context in the curriculum, but we might do that in a future week if we have free time, because it is fairly common. Use state is something that we have to call every single time we want to hold a new state variable in a component. So anytime we have data that we want to change and persist in between component renders, we have to use state. So this is extremely common. Properties are even more common. Use context, you might use like once or twice in a project, in a really big project. And what it does is it allows you to pass data from some parent very, very high up on the tree. And when I say tree, I mean like the relation of parent to children, to children, to children, to children, and so on and so forth. If I look at this website, this is a tree. The top of our tree is just a singular element, and inside that element has multiple different children. And those children have children, and those children have children, and so on and so forth. So use context would be a way that we could say, I have data up at this element at the very top of my tree, but I know that lots of different elements very far inside of my tree, so children of children of children of children, they all need to access that value at some point. And if I had to pass that as a property to every single component in my website, that would be so obnoxious. So we can use context and declare it inside of the parent that just says, I am providing this value to whoever wants it. And from anywhere inside of our application, it could be down here, it could be down here, it could be down here. We can arbitrarily say, I want to consume the value that was provided by this parent element. And when that changes, it'll cause the consumer to re-render with a new value. And that way we don't have to pass as a property to this, and then pass as a property to this, and pass as a property to this. Fairly common, only use it probably once or twice per big project. People use it for like theme data, like if you have a dark mode on a website or a light mode, or maybe you use it for the language that's currently selected on your website so that all of your different components can change their text, or all kinds of other reasons. We'll try and get some experience with that at some point because it is pretty useful, but that's a ways away. Yes, use effect is another hook that is also extremely common. That is also coming later in the curriculum, so I would not worry about it too much yet, but use effect, just as like a high-level overview before you talk about it a lot later. So if this doesn't make sense, don't worry. Use effect is a way that we can run code every time a certain state value changes. So let's say when this title changes, we want to change trying to think of a good example here. Let's create another state variable. Let's say that I have a title and a subtitle. And let's say when the title changes, we want our subtitle to be, I don't know, I just add some extra data. And so whenever our title changes, we want our subtitle to be just like some modification of the existing value. So we would want to call this set subtitle function, which changes our subtitle variable. And we need some way for this piece of code to essentially listen to the title state variable. And when that state changes, we want to call this set subtitle. And so we would do that with a use effect. Effect in React means like a side effect, something that happens because something else happened first. And our effects, we're going to run as a function. So this is a function we're declaring, and when we declare a function, it naturally sort of passes back a reference. So like when we declare a function, we could immediately just store it in a variable, because when we declare that function, it sort of behind the scenes creates a reference, and then we can use that reference wherever we want. So in this case, we're creating a function, and the reference is the first argument to this use effect. Let me import this just so we can hover over it and see what it looks for. So it looks for an effect callback, which is the function that's going to run, and it looks for a dependency list, which is an array. And the array is every single state variable that you want to listen for. And when any of those change, I can have multiple state variables in here. And when any of these change, not all of them, when any of them change, it's going to run this function that performs a side effect. This is also an extremely common pattern. You can have as many use effects as you want. You don't have to limit it to just one. Like maybe you want to listen to the title variable up here, but you have something else you want to run when subtitle changes. And in that case, you would do something else. And we would listen for changes to subtitle down here. So you can have as many effects as you want, and these will listen and trigger when the state variable changes. You can also leave this empty, which means I want to run this one time when the function is first called to create the element. This function will be called over and over again as your application survives every time your component changes. If a piece of state changes, it causes it to re-render. If the parent passes a new property to it, it'll cause it to re-render. Anytime the data changes and it needs to re-render, your use effect will only be called the first time that this happens when the element is being created. So if you have something you need to initialize, you would do that in a use effect with an empty square brackets. There's lots of other hooks. There's a good React documentation page. Legacy React. Built-in React hooks. This just gives you a list of like all of the things that there are. Most of these you should not worry about like at all. And many of them you should not worry about for a long time. We'll talk about use effects later in the curriculum. We definitely talk about use state. That's happening right now. Context we'll probably do as a side project because it is kind of cool. Use ref, I've used a couple of times, very infrequently. Don't worry about that for right now. And then performance and resource hooks, I don't even know what those are, to be honest. Oh, use memo and use callback. Those are also pretty useful. We'll probably also talk about those at some point because they're pretty cool. Just in case you're interested in reading ahead, you'd be welcome to. But if you just want to focus on what's going on this week, definitely focus on that. That's more important. All right, that was a really long-winded answer for why we need props and passing data around. Any questions about something I just said, about something else? Okay. You'd be welcome to stay on after the call ends, and we can talk about it for as long as you need. All right. Any other questions? All right. If there's no specific questions, I got about 5 minutes. I'm trying to think of what we could do that would be interesting. 5 minutes. There was a request that you guys were pretty supportive of in the surveys for some experience doing like programming problems, like leak code, which is a pretty important thing for being able to problem solve in like a work environment. You'll come across things that you need to design how you're going to write the code and making sure that you do it the right way. That's going to set you up for success in the future is pretty important. So So maybe just for fun, we could go through a leak code problem and just kind of show you how it works. I'd be interested, let me know if this would be interesting or not. I created a robot on Discord a while back that just posts a single leak code problem every day as practice. That was designed for people to be able to share their solutions and kind of work through it together. That didn't end up catching on the Discord server I was a part of, but that might be something that we could do like in an opt-in channel in the CodeTheDream server. I would not at all worry about doing leak code problems right now. Like, if at all, it's probably not nearly as important for front end as it is for if you're working on just like a general software engineering job where you'll be doing stuff like this. But one of the easiest ones you could do if you just want to sort of get a feel for how this works is a problem called toSum. So let me zoom in here. Sure, we'll enable dynamic layout, whatever that is. So if I have a problem, it's going to give me a title and a description of that problem. So this problem is we are going to be given an array of integers and a single number target. And we need to return the index in this array of integers of two numbers such that they add up to targets. So it's going to give us some examples. So we have an array of numbers 2, 7, 11, and 15, and we need to find two numbers in here that add up to 9, which in this case, we want to get the numbers 2 and 7, which are our indexes 0 and 1. And same thing down here. So there's going to be exactly one solution, so you don't have to worry about, in this case, maybe there are no solutions. So it'd be a good way to also get comfortable writing JavaScript. So I can go in my editor and pick the JavaScript section. And just to pick something random, let's solve this really quick. Do this right? No, I gotta put parentheses around here. All right, so what I chose to do for this one is we're going to write two different loops here, and we're going to go through our numbers array from start to finish in both ones. So at any given moment, one element will be at index I, and then a different element will be at index j. And we add them together, see if they're equal to target, and if so, we return those two indices. And then I can run it to see if it works. In this case, my test cases are going to pass, and I can submit it. And it'll show me that I probably got this right. Yeah, so this is problem number one. This would be a good one to start for, just to sort of get comfortable with the feeling. If you're really interested in challenging yourself, this would be a good way to do it. This is really good for just software roles in general. This is not super helpful for React necessarily. And if you get into some of the harder problems, it'll ask you to use more complicated data structures. And some of those really complicated data structures like maps don't really exist in JavaScript the same way they do in other languages. So you might have to get a little creative if you go super far in JavaScript, but I would definitely recommend trying some out if you're really interested in challenging yourself and you have extra time. But if you don't have extra time, definitely focus on your CTD stuff. This is not super important to do right now. I just wanted to mention it because some people were interested and had mentioned it previously. All right, one more question. In a front-end role, what kind of live React coding would they ask you to do? Maybe a question for next time. We can answer it now. So my experience with technical interviews is if you're applying for just a general software engineering role, then they will probably ask you to do some questions that feel like leak code problems, where you have a problem statement and you're just writing a function that does something. React is probably going to be different. My guess, I haven't done a React interview before because I don't work in React necessarily right now. You would probably get a lot of questions testing your knowledge about React, like basically trivia questions of in JavaScript, if I do this, what's going to happen? I had an interview one time where it was someone trying to test my knowledge of JavaScript and saying like, ooh, if I use the var keyword instead of the let keyword, what's the difference between the two? And that's just something you should know. And once you write a bunch of JavaScript, you kind of sort of figure these things out and you'll be much more prepared to answer those questions. I'm not sure what kind of actual writing code you're going to have to do for a React interview. My guess would be primarily sort of knowledge and understanding patterns and showing that you've done React projects in the past that they can look over as part of your resume. Maybe if you had to do some coding, they would have you sort of jump into a React project that currently exists and sort of diagnose like why something isn't working and how to fix it. Or they might give you like a template for something that exists and they ask you to write a piece of code. I don't have a great example. I think it would definitely be something that would be worth looking on YouTube just to see like what an example React interview would look like and go from there. We could definitely do something with this in the future for a week down the line. The first couple of weeks are very content heavy and sort of are hard to get through from an understanding of like how React works. And so I prefer to keep these sessions focused on the content, especially since you guys have so many good questions. But like the second half of the class is a lot more smooth sailing for everyone. And so that's kind of our opportunity to jump into some more complicated and interesting topics like what is the use context hook? What is TypeScript? What does a technical interview look like? So we can definitely keep that on the docket and do some practice in the future. But for now, I would use YouTube as a resource because I think that'll be a better explainer than me. I can give you my experiences of a couple of technical interviews, but none of them are React. All right. Any other questions while we're still here? All right. If anything comes up, always feel free to shoot me a DM. Thanks everyone for joining me on a Friday. Have a good weekend. I will see you guys next Thursday, I think.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Vlad, feel free to stick on.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay.
Happy Friday.
Thank you, Smith.
Yeah, that's something to screen share. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. This can go away here for on the second screen. So I can, oh no, not this one. This can be here. The question is about TypeScript, because I've never used TypeScript before, and I'm really thinking how to make the code more professional looking. Shall I declare the interface and everything and types and everything in a separate file for a separate form or something, or should I just keep one file for all the interfaces, or is it in general more readable for people to put it right on top like I do here, where hold on, right over here,
Yeah.
or all the way in the bottom?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think every single person that you talk to is going to have a different answer for this. Some
Okay.
people are extremely opinionated about how things are organized. And I think in most cases, it depends on the project.
Okay.
My, just like some general rules that I live by and have been beaten into my head from working at my job is that it is generally good to keep your interface and type definitions very close to what actually uses them. So especially your props types here, there's no other components that care about your property types.
Oh yeah.
But
Definitely.
you care a lot about your property types if you're just looking at this component and trying to figure out, well, what is this random add to do form props? Like what's in there? And so having it like right there on top, I think is extremely helpful to actually be able to see like right next to it, oh, this is what I have to pass into this specific component instead of hovering over it.
Mhm.
So for properties, because you're only using them in one place, I would definitely keep them where they're being used. I usually like to define all of my types and interfaces and whatnot in any language up at the top of my page, and then the actual like implementations of things down below that, just so that everyone is like forced to see it as they open the page and like see what they're working with, and they know where to look once they get down to the place where it's actually being used.
Mhm.
With that being said, there's a lot of other types you're going to have that are not property types. So maybe you have a like an object that's being passed around a lot of different places. So like your job up there. Let's say that was not an interface and that was just a normal type. You can keep it as an interface. You don't have any need to change it. But oftentimes applications are basically just like passing around a data object. A data object just is an object like a job that has some properties and values attached to it. And maybe we modify those at some point. Yeah, exactly like we have here. This is a data object. And in that case, your data object is probably going to be used in multiple different files. And in that case, maybe it would be a good idea to have a separate file that's just like models.tsx, which has all of your important data models that are related, or you could have like a folder for models and then a file in each one for related models. So maybe you have like a job and like a job title and a person object that are all like parts of each other. So the person is an object and the person has a job and that job has a title.
Uh-huh.
So in that case, I would want to put all of those probably in the same file. But if I have a bunch of other models, they're completely unrelated, I could put them in a separate file. So your interfaces folder here kind of is exactly like that. You have a folder that just has your models, and all your related models go into one specific file. I
Yeah.
think what you have here makes a lot of sense. I honestly would not change anything. I think
All
this
right.
is really good.
Okay.
But it obviously depends on what makes you happy. If you can like
I really want to
convincingly tell
develop a strict habit of doing things instead of wandering around and figuring those little things out, because there are a lot more things to figure out.
yeah, this is the kind of thing that like someone will enforce requirements when you like join in the middle of a project. They'll have a whole layout of like how they've decided to organize things based on their project. But if you're creating something from scratch, if you could convincingly argue why you're putting something somewhere, then it's fine. If you're just putting something somewhere for the sake of it, then that's probably what we try and avoid. Having a good reason for it makes sense. And you have a good reason for how you organize things right now.
Okay. I see. So there is no strict rules or strict.
There's never any strict rules about how you organize your file structure or your.
Yeah, I know, but it can be a mess in such a, it just, in just 5 minutes of coding, it can be just a strict mess.
I absolutely agree. React in particular, like you end up creating so many different components, even like little tiny components in separate files, that having some sort of organizational structure in your project is like basically a requirement. Even at this point, like you've got a ton of different components all at the same level in your source folder, which is fine, but you know, you're going to keep adding more and more as we go on. And so maybe you want to create like a folder for to-do list items and a folder for your form items and stuff like that. Whatever makes sense to you, you're welcome to do.
I'm just following the book right now and doing some other things. Right now, there is a more interesting stuff going on on Node projects, so I'm doing Node right now.
Yeah.
Another question would be, you see how I used the very standard query selector right here to target input
Mhm.
over here? And it doesn't really look like React. It looks like just a vanilla JavaScript. I was wondering if that's the correct way of targeting things. Per se, it wouldn't be an input right here. We have a element ID. We have a to-do title. It doesn't matter. It will still find it.
Yes. This is also a good question. So there's sort of like two ways of doing this in React. One way is the way you're doing it right now, where your HTML element is completely uncontrolled. It's just like a normal element that you can type in and do whatever the hell you want. And React doesn't have any control over it. And when you hit that button to submit this form, then you get whatever the current value is and do stuff with it.
Yeah.
That's great. The other way of doing this is called a controlled component, which is really like specific for inputs, but I'm sure this concept exists for other things. A controlled component is where you have a state variable that holds whatever the current value is of that input.
Yeah, that's
And
what I was doing. That's
yeah,
what I was doing exactly. I had the use states over here hook for specifically for the form, but then we called for the use state on the upper level right here, and I thought it was an overkill, so I just decided to do this query selector.
yeah. So, um, so this is a good use case. I would basically always use a controlled component.
Mm-hmm.
It reads more clearly like what it's doing, where you're saying the value of this input when this component renders is whatever this state variable is. There's no like unknown about any moment in time what it could possibly be. You know what the value of input is going to be. It's going to be whatever is in that state variable. And it also explicitly tells the reader, when I update that value, how are we going to update it? Well, we're going to update it by changing the value of that state variable. So I think it reads a lot more cleaner rather than like your input just being loosey-goosey, whatever happens,
Yeah.
happens, and then just randomly you care about the value somewhere.
Yeah.
And what you would want to do in that case is you have your data, because your input is inside this component, it has to be controlled inside this component.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be, but it should be. You should have your state for this component inside this component. And probably what you would do is inside your handle add to do, you would take whatever's in that state variable and call that new to do function in your app.tsx and pass it the current value of your controlled input. So you would need to pass set new to do as a property to your add to do form. And then when you submit your form, take the current value of that controlled component from that state variable and call the set new to do function with that new value. And so that puts the local value inside of your add to do form, and it passes it up to the parent app, which then that can distribute it to whatever other components it needs.
Yeah.
That I think would be the best React pattern for this.
I'm gonna refactor it. In the end, I want to connect Redux, and probably the state of the app will go to Redux, and most likely the input state will not, because it's such a small thing. Why to throw it all the way to the Redux?
Definitely.
Is a new.
I agree with that.
Just a
If
little use state.
your state is local exclusively to this component, nothing else should care about the current value of input. It should only care when it gets submitted. And so definitely you would leave that controlled component state inside of add to do form. And then the resultant value when you submit your form, you can pass that up to Redux if you want.
Okay. All right.
Jenny, you do
It's more
not need...
clarity.
Hmm?
It brings more clarity.
Great. We are here for more clarity. Jenny, you do not need to use TypeScript. I think TypeScript is very cool. I think it's a great sanity check, if nothing else. TypeScript only helps when you're actually writing the code. Like when the code is actually running, it doesn't do anything because you just take your TypeScript and convert it to normal JavaScript. TypeScript is exclusively so that you know when you're passing data around as a property or as a state value, that it can only be this very specific type, and you can't make any weird mistakes like, oh, well, I think that this is going to be an array, but it's actually undefined. Like that just, you're eliminating that possibility, which is super, super valuable. Definitely would recommend picking it up at some point. If you're not super comfortable with React right now, this is not the time to start worrying about TypeScript. So I would leave that for a little ways down the line. TypeScript, once you sort of get the hang of it, you can roll with it pretty quickly, but there's a lot of setup that's sort of confusing. And
Oh yeah.
if you're new to React or JavaScript, definitely focus on that first. TypeScript does, in a way, make it messier because it's more code. Like you have to write extra things, but it means that when you have an enormous project, everything is guaranteed. You guarantee that some data that you're passing to this function has to be of a specific type. You can't accidentally pass a number where you're expecting it to be a string. And that's like immeasurably valuable. I would not want to work on a JavaScript project like at an enterprise level unless it was TypeScript.
It just yells at you whenever you're passing something what it's not expected.
Yes, and that is so helpful.
Yeah, very.
We can definitely do a more in-depth TypeScript rundown again later in the class once people are comfortable. I think that's something that's easy to talk about and like something people can adopt pretty easily, but let's push that for a couple weeks. Sorry, go ahead, Vlad.
The void property after setting right here, I understand that it can be just erased right here, but it indicates that the function is not returning anything. How important this this void thing is, and when you're reading code, is it better to always indicate what your function will return?
If you get rid of the arrow and the void, does that actually like compile?
Yeah, I no, is it?
It's got a little red squiggle.
Hold on. Yeah, it's not compiling. Oh, I didn't even know.
I'm pretty sure it's required. If you have a type that is a function, you have to, I think this is probably not like a hard and fast rule, but you have to have the arrow to indicate it's a function and your parameters on the left and your return type on the right, because that's the only way it can know all the information about the function so that you can guarantee that whatever function you pass fits that description. So if it's a function that doesn't do anything, it has to be void. If it does return something, you put something else there, like number or some other object.
Yes. Okay. All right. That will do it. I have no other questions for now.
All
I'll
right.
be prepared for next time. I
I will
promise.
be prepared for next time. Lots of really good questions. I love
Okay.
good questions.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good weekend, Jenny, and everyone else who's still around. I will talk to you guys next week.
Bye-bye.